Do you think that it is appropriate for us to refer to aging as a kind of disease? Question mark. I am posing this question to you, and I'm also posing this question to myself. And in this kind of, I guess, chat with myself, I'm going to be discussing with myself some ideas that I think kind of contradict this idea that indeed we can categorize aging as a kind of disease. Now, I'll point out that what spurred all of this on, just, if you're curious, what spurred all this on is a TEDx talk wherein this scientist or person who works for this research company was talking about and describing aging as a kind of disease and the possible and potential cures in the future that they or others like them could offer. And so that's kind of what spurred all this on. So anyway, without further ado, let me start getting into some of the things that I think might actually contradict this. And I have about 5 points or so let's get into it. All right, so let's just say you're given immortality, and with that, you just retain your normal, healthy, youthful body, and anything that you would have in that youthful state. But one thing that you're not given is like a super healing factor. Now, that's, to my mind, that's a bit of a problem, and I'll tell you why. Because it's fine that you could have some rather harsh damage done to your body throughout the course, or even moderate damage done to your body throughout the course of your life, and that happens to a lot of people. You fall out of a tree, you break your arm in a terrible way, and then the doctors patch you up and they put a bar to keep your arm held together, they screw it in, and now you've got this as a feature of your body. Now, that's okay. You can have that kind of damage done to you and those kinds of repairs done to you over the course of a normal lifespan, and it's not going to be too much of a hindrance to you. But imagine accumulating a lot of that kind of damage over the course of an infinitely long potentially infinitely long lifespan. That's a bit of a problem, I think, right? Like even something as trivial as I don't know if I'd call this trivial, but is as moderately damaging as like getting a flesh wound. Let's say you're on a nature walk and a coyote bites you, bites into your flesh, and you manage to escape and you heal from it, but you get this big scar on your forearm. Well, you're living forever, so presumably you're going to get more and more damage accumulating, even if it is just like damage to the facade of your body and it's not really a terrible amount of damage at any given time. It's going to accumulate. So eventually, your body's going to warp, right? The shapes of your bones are going to change. They're going to wear out. The flesh inside of your body is going to wear out. Your natural healthy system is going to maybe not going to be able to repair some of the damage done to you, and so that's going to have to be repaired artificially. And eventually you're going to look like, I don't know, the Elephant Man or something. You're going to look like a troll. I think that is not an appealing state to be in for a lot of people who are thinking, ooh, this getting rid of this whole aging thing is a good idea. I like how that sounds. I don't think they'll like the sound of it when we're talking about them accumulating all this damage and it never going away. Now, one way to solve that, of course, is that somewhere along the way, maybe years later, maybe many years later, I don't know, you're given an injection and you're now given a superhuman healing ability, and you can be brought back to your natural youthful state once again. That's entirely possible, I guess. All this is a hypothetical. And so that kind of solves it. But if we're starting off with what I'm talking about, which is you're just in your youthful state and nothing more, accumulating damage to your body over the course of time, that can become, I think, a pretty big problem. So anyway, let's move on to the next thing. Alright, so I'm going to start this one off as I started the video, which is with a question. Okay, so my question is, how do you compete with a person who is continuously and forever in their youthful state? How do you compete with them professionally as a person who is not immortal? So some people have been granted immortality. We as a society in this case treat aging as a disease, and some people have gained this immortality. Maybe the people that are very rich and can afford the procedure do this, and the people that are poor or just, moderately wealthy but not wealthy enough to afford the procedure, well, they're stuck with their mortality. How do you compete with people professionally, earning a wage, earning a living? How do you compete with them if they live forever and can accumulate all kinds of experience, all kinds of partnerships, friendships, connections, right? Creating all this bias and all these people that they know, maybe other immortal people, right? How do you compete with them professionally? Traditionally, part of how younger generations could compete was, it still is, of course, is that the older generation eventually wants to retire, and they are getting older, right? And though they are more experienced, they're getting older, and there's some issues in relationship with that. And so younger people, they can push themselves a little bit harder, right? They can be harder on their bodies. They can work harder. They can promise more because maybe they have less less personal issues to deal with. Maybe they don't have a spouse. Maybe they haven't started a family. And maybe this older generation of people, they have a lot more personal issues they have to deal with day to day, and so that makes this youthful mortal generation of people, it makes them look attractive, right? Well, you don't have a lot of that anymore if you're competing with a new generation of immortal people that will only accumulate more and more experience as time goes and widen that gap. So yeah, I don't think I need to go any further with this. The problem is definitely, this is definitely a problem, I think. Now, here's the thing though. This actually is more of an argument on a societal level against this idea of looking at aging as a disease. It is actually kind of an argument though in favor of the individuals that can afford this immortality procedure. I mean, I think a lot of them would like the idea of being able to accumulate all this extra experience continuously, being in a constant youthful body from now till forever, almost, possibly. That's a good argument for them. I think a lot of people would be attracted to those prospects. So anyway, let's move on. Everyone else dies. Let me repeat that. Everyone else dies. I mean, with exception to, I guess, anyone else who's immortal like you, sure. But what if you have a family and you're just in love with this idea of living forever, and they don't see things the same way? So they don't, you're a family that is well off, you're rich, you can afford it, but everyone else is just like, no, I like my finite life. This is the way it's supposed to be. And I don't know if they derive that from their religious beliefs or just being pragmatic about things, being realistic about things. They maybe find an appreciation in living a short life rather than living forever. And this person, you, I guess in this case, you take a different route and you become immortal. You have to now watch everyone around you die, right? Your spouse dies if you have one. Your kids die if you have them. Right? Their kids die, and their kids die, and so on and so forth, down and down and down the line. Now, you're a witness to all of this. I mean, assuming you stick around, and, well, why wouldn't you stick around? I mean, unless you're going to some other planet or something like that. And who knows, maybe that's what you would do. But assuming you stick around, you're going to be watching all these people die, right? Your family, your friends. That has to have a negative impact on your mind, right? There's only so much that you can take, I think, before it just gets really weird. You now have generations that have died that are your relations. Now, it gets even messier if you're like getting a new spouse, and then when that one dies, you're getting a new spouse, and then when that one dies, then you keep continually creating new versions of yourself, perpetuating on into the future, and you're just out surviving all of them. Again, with exception to whoever else is doing the same thing as you and becoming immortal, right? I think that we need to think about this kind of thing a little bit more before we would jump into that whole, immortality thing. I think people maybe don't really appreciate the kind of situation they're actually in where it's important that you die, that you perish, before your offspring and before their offspring and so on and so forth. I think there's a kind of mental health that goes along with that, with the idea of your offspring will outsurvive you, right? So there's that. I don't think I need to speak to this anymore. I think you can all come to your own conclusion on this. Anyway, let's move on. In 1,000 years, would you still be you? I guess is where I'm going with this next one. Now, why I say that is because it kind of seems like memory is a finite thing. You don't have this infinite storage, and I don't know if that's built in or if that is just the natural byproduct of storing new memories, more recent memories that have greater utility because they're more recent, type of thing. I don't exactly know what brings this about, but if I'm thinking back 10 years, I don't remember all the specifics. In fact, I can only remember a kind of very particular things that happened, like a smattering of things that happened amongst much more information that happened that I used to retain, but I no longer retain. So that's just 10 years. Imagine in 1,000 years. I mean, I don't think you'd remember anything from the 1,000 years previous. Now, there are some things that I do think you could retain. Some very core root things, like, for example, riding a bike. It's quite possible that, who knows, in 1,000 years, maybe it's possible. It's so fundamentally kind of part of you, this, like this experience of riding a bike, that, who knows, in 1,000 years, maybe you could just get back on a bike and it would be like you were just riding a bike the other day. I don't know. It certainly seems that way for some things. I'll tell you another thing, too. In the arts, it kind of is that way. You can do a particular kind of art 10 years previous, and then you can do it again, and you won't be where you were 10 years ago, but you will be definitely ahead of the point where you were when you didn't know how to do that particular kind of art at all, right? So there's definitely some things that you can retain, but memories about your day-to-day events, even some, more, I guess, memorable parts of your life, I think these things kind of deteriorate over time, and I think eventually you will forget them. Now, your memory can be jogged in some circumstances, yes, but I think there's a point at which your brain will just completely drop the memory, and it might be like a storage limitation. I don't know. I mentioned this before. I don't really understand, the actual inner workings of the brain to that extent. But it definitely seems to be a thing. Now, the consequence of this is you being potentially a different person in the future, right? Now, it's a gradual change over time. So you, at any, if you're looking at the small sequences of time, like let's say every 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you still are largely yourself, but over 1,000 years, you could have a huge transition into becoming a completely different person. Now, some people maybe like that idea, some people don't, but it's definitely something to consider if you're thinking about whether or not immortality is a good thing or a bad thing. So let's move on to the very last point that I would like to make. All right, so getting on to the very last thing, and I think probably most important point that I want to talk about in this video is the concept of appreciation. Now, there are many things that we appreciate in life, and some of these things are just like intrinsic to human beings and human nature, and some of these things are kind of like learned and derived from your actual experiences in real life that you have that go beyond how you're programmed, right? So my question is, if you live a life that is potentially infinitely long, how do you appreciate life on the same, I guess, using the same standards as the person who lives a mortal life, a finite amount of life? And why I would say that this is important, if your question is, well, who cares? Or your point is, who cares? Well, here's why it matters. If you have a finite lifespan and you have certain things that you want to do in your life, right? You know that you only have a certain amount of time to do it in, and so that kind of kicks you into gear and gets you going to fulfill those dreams and those desires and so on and so forth. Well, what is the equivalent thing for the person who lives forever, right? They can just kick that can down the road. They could just say, well, hold on a second, yeah, sure, I have these aspirations, right? But I could just do them whenever I want. I don't need to do them today or tomorrow. I don't need to do them in the next 10 years, the next 100 years. I could do them whenever. In fact, you can keep rationalizing away all of these things by saying, well, it'll be even easier to do in the future. Like, for example, someone wants to become an astronaut. Well, who knows, maybe in 100 years, becoming an astronaut just requires you to, I don't know, fill out some form, and then boom, you're an astronaut. Whereas today, it requires a lot of training and a lot of skill and certain aptitudes and certain attributes and a certain quality of intelligence and so on and so forth. Well, you can just do that. You can rationalize it all away if you live forever or potentially live forever. This, I think, is a big problem, and I don't know how you get around this problem. So anyway, I'll leave this last comment where it is. You can take from that what you will. And in the future, I'll probably refine these things. I'll probably think of a couple more, and I'll get rid of some of them that I think are a little bit less robust, and go on from there. Okay, ordinarily this is where I guess I would offer some kind of conclusion. I'm not really going to do that. I mean, I could offer something tentative, but it would only be that because if I'm being honest, I have to consider more things before I can come to an actual conclusion. I've thought of a lot of kind of potentially negative things, but there are a lot of positive things I haven't really thought a great deal about, and I will do probably more video content in the future about maybe the more positive aspects of this, or the potential for more positive things with regarding to, the idea of immortality. But if I were to tentatively answer the question that I asked at the beginning of this video, which was, let's see if I can recall, something to the effect of, do you think it proper or correct or right that we describe aging as a kind of disease? Well, my tentative answer to that would be no. I think it's not right that we do that. And it's not right that we do that because we rely on aging for a lot of things. It's very normal. It's part of the human experience, and it may in fact need to be part of the human experience for some of the things that we're built to do, for those things to be encouraged and for those things to happen and to be played through, right? Like I mentioned with the very last point that I made, I'm not going to reiterate it, but I think you know what I'm talking about. It kind of needs to be a thing, right? Now, I will say this. It's possible that we can get around these problems if at the same time we tweak human nature. All right, so you gain immortality. It's handed on down to you, but at the same time, how you are as a human is tweaked just a bit so that you can remain happy, you can remain healthy for that much extended lifespan. That could change where this goes, and that would definitely, potentially, I shouldn't say definitely, it would potentially change my conclusion on this, which again is tentatively no, I don't think that we can, but again, that can change in the future. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for sticking around this far and listening to this. Much appreciated. I will be doing more content on into the future, and subscribe. That'd be great. And thank you very much. Bye.